Story 1. In the United Kingdom, people often claim that if an item is listed for sale in a shop, the shop is legally required to sell it to you at that price. This is not true. A shop does not have to sell you anything at any price. Often, as a gesture of goodwill, shops will honor erroneous prices, but they are under no obligation to do so. Story 2. Commercial use of a photograph generally means selling the photograph or using it for advertising, and it implies endorsement. You can take and sell photographs of Eric Clapton, but if you place the same photograph in an advertisement for a specific guitar without a model release, you can be sued. Story 3. I am a probate attorney. I have had many people ask me when the reading of the will is going to take place. I explain that only happens in movies. One day I will stage one and hire a mysterious blonde wearing a veil to sit quietly in the corner. I will tell everyone that she inherits everything, provided that she adopts the decedent's cute but troublemaking 6-year-old child that no one knew about. Or she can spend the night in a haunted house. Her choice. Story 4. I am a lawyer. This is a law that exists but is commonly misunderstood. You cannot simply obtain a restraining order against anyone. Most states have specific laws defining who is eligible for a restraining order, typically household members or former romantic partners. Restraining orders are usually issued in domestic violence cases or for victims of crimes. You cannot obtain a restraining order and use it to require someone to stay 100 feet away for a comical or arbitrary purpose. This applies at least to the United States. Story 5. Regarding my father, who is a lawyer, he said that police officers cannot lie to you. This is false. They can and they do. There are so many replies that I cannot find some I would like to respond to. So I want to leave a general note for those who have asked for a reference. Frazier versus Cupp is the Supreme Court ruling that affirmed the legality of deceptive interrogation tactics in 1969. The ruling is still active. Story 6. People who think it is illegal to be videotaped in a public space. Story 7. An arrest is not magically invalidated if the police do not read you your rights at the scene. There could be a whole thread of misconceptions that people have from watching police television shows. Story 8. Sovereign citizen claims are common. I feel like enough people have claimed to be sovereign citizens that it has become normal. But no, generally you cannot declare yourself exempt from the laws in effect where you are. Story 9. A lot of people do not understand that co-signing a loan means you are equally responsible for the debt. If the car is repossessed, your wages can be garnished. Co-signing is not a statement of personal confidence. It is a legal promise to pay if the borrower does not. In short, do not co-sign loans for anyone. Story 10. Circumstantial evidence. Popular culture's portrayal of criminal law often draws a distinction between hard evidence, like blood at the scene or a weapon in the suspect's possession, and circumstantial evidence, such as what a witness heard or mismatched entries in a calendar that contradict an alibi. How often have you heard a TV suspect, when confronted with some facts, say, "That's all circumstantial. It's not enough to convict me." The viewer is left with the impression that the facts presented do not matter and that the law weighs circumstantial evidence less. In reality, the law does not afford any more weight to one type of evidence than another. There is not even a formal distinction in criminal rules between the two. There is an academic distinction. Hard evidence, also called direct evidence, is based on direct observation and does not require any explanation beyond the facts themselves. Circumstantial evidence requires some inference to arrive at the important fact to be proved. For example, a witness testifying that they saw the suspect stab the victim is direct evidence of the stabbing. But that witness could also testify that before the stabbing they heard the suspect demand that the victim hand over his wallet and the victim refuse. This is circumstantial evidence of motive. One can infer that the suspect stabbed the victim because he wanted the wallet and did not get it when asked. Circumstantial evidence is often vital to establish certain criminal elements, like motive, that cannot be directly observed. But there is no get-out-of-jail-free card just because evidence is circumstantial. If your spouse hears you plotting to kill them and sees your axe-sharpening equipment in the attic, your neighbor finds your copy of How to Kill Your Wife and Get Away with It, and you write an email to your brother saying, "I'm going to do it tonight," She cooked my steak well done. You are probably going to jail for murder. It is irrelevant that you destroyed your axe, cleaned the basement perfectly, ensured there were no witnesses, and disposed of the body. Circumstantial evidence can be enough. Story 11. In California, it is not illegal to discuss your wages with your coworkers despite what your boss might say. I am a lawyer in that state, and I assume the law is the same in the other 49 states, but I do not want to speculate. Story 12. As a former lawyer in the United Kingdom, I lost count of the number of people who thought jaywalking was a crime. Unless a road specifically states no pedestrians or is a motorway, no such offense exists here. It may be an offense in other countries such as Australia, the United States, Germany, and others. Story 13. Even though many people think so, there has never been a Danish law allowing you to beat a Swede with a stick if he walks across the ice on Øresund in winter. But the absence of such a law does not imply it should never exist. Story 14. This is not exactly what you are asking for, but I think it is valuable for people to know. You do not need to wait 24 hours to report someone is missing. Story 15. A law that exists but is widely misunderstood is the concept of entrapment. If the police place a bait vehicle in a high-crime area, that is not entrapment. If the police watch a bar known to overserve to see if there are impaired drivers at the end of the night, that is not entrapment. Entrapment only occurs when a government agent induces you to commit a crime you otherwise would not have committed. Story 16. Fighting words are not a defense to battery. It means the government can prosecute face-to-face insults likely to lead to a breach of the peace. Edited to add. Not to say that provocation defenses do not exist, depending on the jurisdiction, but fighting words in the United States refers to an exception to the First Amendment. Story 17. In my country, some people believe they can press charges against someone. You cannot. You report a crime, and the police decide whether to take it further. It is not up to you whether charges are brought. You may want charges brought, but the police can drop the case. Alternatively, you can refuse to press charges, and the police may proceed anyway. It is harder without victim or witness cooperation, but they still can. You have the right to bring a civil case, of course, but when people say they can press charges, they generally mean doing so through the police. Story 18. The Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act is a real but widely misunderstood law. Many people think it prevents any discussion of their health issues by anyone. It does not. Story 19. The thing that frustrates me most, even though it is not a specific claim that a particular law exists but rather a rule of evidence, is that is just hearsay. You have no evidence. Comes up all the time in many contexts. Even lawyers use it when it suits them. Nothing but hearsay and speculation. Usually, when people say that they mean do not believe them, they are lying, which is fair enough, but that is not what hearsay means. Lots of evidence is someone speaking. That is what a witness is. That is why testimony exists. It remains evidence even though it is a person speaking. Hearsay means that, in most cases, you cannot have person A testify that person B said a specific fact in order to prove that the fact is true. Hearsay literally means a person heard someone else say something. It means your witness can only testify about things they actually know. Extremely importantly, it is not hearsay when person B is actually the person on the other side of the case. Person A may testify, person B told me, yes, I will commit the crime on Tuesday. If person B is the defendant accused of committing that crime, you cannot object that it is hearsay if you are the person who allegedly made the statement. Story 20. In the United Kingdom, it is not illegal to park on someone else's driveway. It is classified as trespassing, a civil offense rather than a criminal offense, so the police cannot take action. Many people are surprised, as they believe they have exclusive rights to parking outside their house. Story 21. You can drive 10 miles per hour over the speed limit. My dad thought this was true because he was new to the country, and he quickly found out from a speeding ticket that it was not. I now realize this may vary from state to state and from county to county. In my case, South Florida generally tolerates 10 miles per hour over the limit, but it is still technically illegal. Story 22. A negligent motorcycle driver forced me to hit him from behind with my car. I was young and naive at the time and had never been in an accident until then. The man made me sign a paper saying the accident was my fault because I hit him from behind and he wanted compensation. I explained the situation to my dad. He concluded that the man was obstructing traffic and that I had no option but to hit him from behind in that circumstance. The man took us to court and showed the judge the paper I had signed. I explained that I signed it under duress and that he had told me, by law, whoever hits from behind is responsible for the accident. The judge looked him in the eye and asked if that was true. He said yes. She then asked him to point out which law states that, and he shut the fuck up. Fuck that guy. Story 23. I'm no lawyer, but I don't feel like most of the villains in Scooby-Doo committed any actual crime. I don't think it's against the law to put on a mask and scare trespassers on your property. Story 24. In the United Kingdom, it is illegal to drink under the age of 18. You can buy alcohol with a meal at 16, including beer, wine, and cider, and you are not breaking any laws if you give your child some alcohol in the privacy of your own home and they are over the age of 5. At 16, you must be accompanied by an adult, and the alcohol must be paid for by the adult. Story 25. If you live together for a certain period of time, you are not automatically legally married. Different time periods apply for different purposes, and being a common law spouse does not always have the same legal effect as being married. For example, an employer might extend spousal benefits after 1 year of cohabitation, while division of property rules may only apply after 3 years. These rules vary by jurisdiction. Some jurisdictions do not grant division of property rights to common law spouses. Story 26. Good Samaritan laws are not as broad as people think. For context, I work in emergency services. Some people believe that saying, "I was trying to help," will get them out of any sticky situation. Note, Good Samaritan laws vary by country and state, and medical examples are a little more clear than others. Imagine you are driving and notice someone on the side of the road who needs help. If you swerve off the road to assist and accidentally run over a child on the sidewalk, you are not free from the consequences simply because you intended to help someone else. Versions of that story have occurred, and drivers have tried to use a Good Samaritan defense because they meant well. There is some gray area, but if your unprompted action clearly makes the situation worse than if you had done nothing, good intentions are not a get-out-of-jail-free card. Story 27. I'm not sure whether this would technically be a law, but this is about how tax brackets work. I've repeatedly heard people in retail or construction say something like, "I'm going to turn down this shift because if I take it I'll go up into the next tax bracket and so will pay more in extra taxes than I will earn from taking the shift." The tax system is specifically designed not to do this. Here is an example of how tax brackets actually work. Suppose there is a tax bracket at $10,000. Income up to $10,000 is taxed at 5%, and income above $10,000 is taxed at 10%. People seem to think that if they earn $9,999, they will pay 5% of that, which is $499.95, but that if they earn $10,001, they will pay 10% of that, which is $1,000.10. How it actually works is that you pay 5% on the first $10,000 and 10% only on the dollars above $10,000. If you earn $9,999, you pay $499.95. If you earn $10,001, you pay $500.10. You earned an additional $2 and paid an additional 15 cents in taxes. 5 cents on the $10,000 and 10 cents on the $10,000 first dollar. There are, of course, interactions between taxes and government programs. When someone is receiving certain government benefits, it is possible for each dollar you earn to be reduced 1-for-1 by benefit phase-outs or clawbacks. In that case, there is a genuine disincentive to work more hours. But for a typical worker thinking about how many hours to work before entering a higher tax bracket, you will not earn less by working more. So work as much as you like. Story 28. United States ex-lawyer here. There is no law that requires the police to provide you with their name and badge number when asked. There may be internal policies that require it, but that is not statutory law. There is no law that requires the police to get a supervisor if you demand one. That is a matter of policy, not law. There is no law that allows you to decide on the spot whether a police order is lawful. A court decides the lawfulness of an order after the fact, and there are penalties for failing to comply with police orders. Update. Someone noted that in New York State there is a law requiring officers to identify themselves and carry identification cards. That is an important exception. Many rules are enforced through internal policies rather than statute. Those policies often have real consequences, so officers generally do not ignore them. Second update. I describe myself as an ex-lawyer because I no longer practice law. Attorneys are admitted to practice under the rules of the state bar. I left the state in which I was admitted, did not complete the continuing legal education requirements to maintain my standing with that bar, and did not seek admission in my new state. I am technically ineligible to practice until I complete the continuing legal education requirements and recertify with the bar of my old state, and I have no intention of doing so. In short, ex-lawyer. Thanks for the civil discourse. Story 29. I am a law student and I support self-defense. Although the law exists, people in my country really think it is broader than it actually is. Story 30. Freedom of speech in my country. That is from watching too many movies from the United States. Story 31. It is federal law in the United States that plainclothes or undercover police officers have to identify themselves as law enforcement if asked. No, it is not the law, and they can tell you whatever they want. Story 32. Regarding brothel laws at universities, there are no laws stating that 3 or more women in one house constitute a brothel. Story 33. In many countries, escaping from prison is not an offense. The desire to be free is so inherent to humans that it needs to be respected, provided you do not commit another felony while escaping, for example, killing a guard. I received my first award. Many thanks. Story 34. Driving with interior overhead car lights on is not illegal. Edit. Thanks for the gold, kind stranger. My first. Story 35. They cannot arrest a husband and wife for the same crime. Story 36. Common civil liberty protections do not restrict private individuals or organizations. Freedom of the press, freedom of speech, and due process apply only to government action. For example, most organizations can restrict your speech based on their internal policies. There are instances where organizations must provide certain protections because they receive federal funding. For example, schools that receive federal funds must comply with Title IX. Story 37. An undercover police officer must inform a target that the officer is undercover if the target asks. Story 38. In Germany, most people believe that if a product breaks within 2 years of purchase, the seller must repair or replace it for free. This belief comes from a law that states if a product had a defect at the time of purchase, the buyer has 2 years during which the seller must repair or replace it, but the buyer must prove the defect existed when the product was purchased. Story 39. Not a lawyer, but many people believe that black belts in martial arts must register their hands as deadly weapons. It pains me when people say that, and you can tell who is blatantly lying when they claim their hands are registered as deadly weapons because they are a black belt in a martial art. Story 40. I am not a lawyer, but unfair firings are often not illegal. People assume that being treated unfairly at work, such as being fired for something trivial that someone else did without consequence, means a law was broken and they have a strong case for suing. In most cases, this is not true. Only a few reasons for firing expose a company to legal liability. Firing for race, color, national origin, religion, sex, age, or disability is illegal in all states. For other reasons, the law varies by state. In many states, you can be fired for a medical condition, sexual orientation, tattoos, a particular facial expression, weight, or simply because the employer is not attracted to you. Story 41. Freedom of speech and censorship laws do not apply on social media. If your comments or posts are deleted by an administrator, it does not infringe on your rights. Have you been arrested or prosecuted for your statements? If the answer is no, then relax. Edit. Canada. Story 42. If a trooper is not wearing their hat when they write you a ticket, it is not automatically dismissed. A trooper could be wearing a clown costume and still have the same authority. Story 43. Netherlands. Cannabis is often described as legal, but it is technically illegal. Some licensed coffee shops are allowed to sell small amounts. They are not supposed to sell to tourists, although this still happens frequently. Open borders and the difficulty of distinguishing tourists, especially in Amsterdam, make enforcement difficult and can reduce profits. I am not a lawyer and do not know the exact specifics of the laws. Generally speaking, drugs remain illegal. Story 44. Not a lawyer, but as someone who watches a lot of videos on the subreddit Public Freakout where people scream that it is illegal to film them without permission, I would say that in most cases you do not need someone's permission to film in a public place where there is no expectation of privacy. If it were a public bathroom, that could be a problem, but filming in a park or on the sidewalk is generally not illegal. There is a great related video from Wonder Shozen that cracks me up. Story 45. I am a lawyer. I am just here to see whether laws I do not know are fake. Also, 90% of the time when someone invokes the First Amendment, they do not understand what they are talking about. Surprisingly, Jehovah's Witnesses are leaders in a large portion of First Amendment case law. Story 46. It is not a law, but people believe the polygraph tells the truth. Polygraph cannot be used as evidence in court. Therefore, it is not considered scientific evidence. You might as well use a Ouija board. Story 47. There is no single legal limit for alcohol when driving. Many people, especially some media outlets, say there is a legal limit for the amount of alcohol you can have and still legally drive. That is incorrect. Every state has a statutorily established per se limit. If you are driving and your blood alcohol concentration is above that limit, you are per se intoxicated and the state does not need additional evidence to obtain a conviction. If your blood alcohol concentration is below that limit, you can still be convicted of drunk driving. The state must present additional evidence of impairment to secure a conviction. So even if you have had just one drink or your blood alcohol concentration is below the per se limit, you can still be arrested and convicted of drunk driving, driving while intoxicated, driving under the influence, or operating under the influence, depending on the term your state uses. Story 48. Many people believe that private businesses must respect your freedom of speech. Story 49. If the teacher is more than 15 minutes late, you are legally allowed to go home. Story 50. As a keen viewer of videos of angry people on the internet, I often hear someone in a public place say, "You cannot record me. I have not given you permission." Amusingly, this is often followed by "I know my rights" and then some form of assault, while the person committing it is being videotaped in high resolution by the victim. Story 51. Not technically a law, but the phrase life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness is not in the Constitution. I hear it all the time, and it drives me crazy. Story 52. I am a police officer, not a lawyer. Miranda warnings are given only when a person is in custody and the police are taking a statement. They apply to custodial interrogation and the risk of coercion. A police officer does not have to read Miranda warnings after an arrest if the officer does not ask questions afterward. People often ask whether someone arrested for driving under the influence will have their case dismissed because Miranda warnings were not read. The answer is almost always no. Story 53. Costco requiring you to wear a mask does not violate your constitutional rights. The Constitution protects people from government overreach and limits government actions. It does not regulate private companies. Story 54. I think one thing we should definitely point out is that just because something is not technically a law, it does not mean you cannot get arrested for it, at least in the United States. We should always note that the United States has more laws than most people know exist, and law enforcement is not required to understand all of them. So, just because Google claims something, it does not mean it is true or will hold up. I suggest anyone dabbling in the law, legally or illegally, watch this video. The presenter covers multiple topics, including the 27,000-page book that contains all of our laws and that no one has read. He also explains how certain things do not even need to be illegal in your state or in the United States. There are laws that state if something is illegal in any country, you can be charged for it. The main topic he discusses is why you should never speak to law enforcement under any circumstances. Even if you are 100% innocent, say nothing. Story 55. You do not need to establish motive to find someone guilty of a crime. It makes for better television. But motive is not a required element of the crime. It may help establish mens rea, the mental state required to commit the crime, but it is not required to prove that the defendant expected to gain anything. Story 56. Many people think you must wait 48 hours to report a disappearance to the police. That is not true. Waiting that long puts the person at greater risk. Story 57. Just because you insist you live in a free country does not mean you can go anywhere and do anything you want. Story 58. Search my car? You are going to need a warrant for that. In the United States, the police do not need a warrant to search your car. They only need probable cause or for you to give them consent. Story 59. Former divorce lawyer. Committing adultery does not change what someone is normally entitled to in a divorce settlement. Divorce law is primarily about what is fair by the numbers, dividing property equally and paying the correct support according to income. It only speeds up the time it takes to finalize a divorce, but you still need an official, fair settlement in place for custody and property division, which takes time, so it is usually a moot point. So cheating is not really relevant. I had clients who insisted on finding their former partners out just to prove a point. They wanted court orders to obtain records of all phone calls and tried to show me records of text conversations. I would say you have already been separated for a while. It does not matter in the eyes of the law. Let us focus on the settlement. What are the incomes and what is the property worth? If you cannot afford to buy the other out, you have to sell it. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.